The server at the diner slid the check across the laminate table, a smear of syrup still visible beside the sugar dispenser. Susan laughed, a bright, unfamiliar sound, as Mr. Anderson's hand settled on her lower back. "Don't mind Dave," he smirked, his eyes on me. "Some men just don't know how to appreciate what they have." My coffee cup trembled slightly. Dave considered himself a man who had built a solid life. He was an architect, steady with his hands and his mind, designing structures that stood firm. His home in the quiet suburbs of northern Illinois was much the same, a place of order, of comfort, where his wife Susan, a kind-hearted middle school teacher, and their 7-year-old daughter Molly made every day feel like it had a proper foundation. He liked the hum of their routine, the predictable rhythm of school mornings and quiet evenings. It was, in his estimation, picture perfect. The first faint cracks appeared with the change in Susan's morning schedule. She began leaving the house earlier, often before Dave had finished his second cup of coffee. The explanation was always the same: urgent meetings at school, faculty planning sessions, new curriculum development. Dave, accustomed to her dedication, accepted these reasons without much thought. Teachers he knew often put in extra hours. One Tuesday morning, as Dave packed Molly's lunchbox, Molly skipped into the kitchen, her bright eyes wide with a new piece of information. "Mommy said she was meeting Mr. Anderson before class," she chirped, her voice light. Dave paused with a sandwich bag in his hand. Mr. Anderson was a new name. He hadn't heard Susan mention him before. "Oh," he said, trying to keep his tone even. "Who's Mr. Anderson, honey?" Molly just shrugged, absorbed in finding her favorite dinosaur sticker for her apple. Later that week, the name surfaced again. Molly was perched on the counter, swinging her legs, while Dave buttered toast. "Mommy said Mr. Anderson likes her new perfume," she confided, a conspiratorial giggle escaping her. "She called it secret grown-up stuff." The words were innocent enough, but a small, sharp prick of unease went through Dave. He pushed it down, attributing it to a child's misinterpretation. That evening, Susan was late. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the driveway when a dark sedan pulled up. Dave watched from the living room window as Susan got out, a quick wave exchanged with the driver before the car pulled away. "Mr. Anderson," Dave presumed. Susan walked in, her cheeks a little flushed. A bright, slightly too loud greeting. "Just teacher lounge stuff," she said, tossing her keys onto the hall table, her explanation vague, thin like onion skin. Dave nodded, collecting the plates from dinner. In the days that followed, Dave started noticing things. Susan's phone, usually left charging on the kitchen counter, was now almost always with her, often face down. When it buzzed, which it did frequently, he could sometimes catch a glimpse of M. Anderson on the screen before she quickly picked it up or slid it further out of sight. The messages seemed endless, the phone a quiet, constant presence between them. She offered more explanations, always centered around work. Staff meetings, she'd say, or off-site conferences, always coordinating with Mr. Anderson. The details were never precise, the locations fuzzy. Dave, who usually asked about her day, found himself listening to these vague statements with a growing sense of detachment, as if she were speaking about someone else's schedule. He would ask a follow-up question, and she would answer, but her eyes often seemed to be elsewhere, her mind occupied by something just beyond his reach. He watched her across the dinner table, her mood often subdued, lost in thought. A new message would flash from M. Anderson, and she would dismiss it with a flick of her wrist, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture of annoyance or perhaps something else. About a week after the initial mention of Mr. Anderson, Molly came home from school with a piece of construction paper clutched in her hand. It was a drawing rendered in vibrant, confident crayon strokes. Two stick figures dominated the page. One, with long hair and a dress, was labeled Mommy. The other, taller, with short, spiky hair, was Mr. Anderson. Their stick figure arms were wrapped around each other, a disproportionately large heart drawn crudely around their embrace. Molly held it up proudly. "Mommy likes hugging him a lot," she announced, pointing to the heart with a stubby finger. "We had private talks too. She said it's grown-up stuff." Dave felt a sudden cold catch in his chest. His breath seemed to snag, stuck somewhere between his lungs and his throat. The innocent depiction, drawn with such childlike certainty, hammered home a disturbing possible reality, making a quiet thrum of dread start in his stomach. He cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. "That's a nice drawing, honey," he managed, glancing at Susan, who was stirring pasta on the stove. "Susan, look at Molly's artwork." Susan turned, her smile stretching thin as she saw the drawing. She laughed too loudly, the sound brittle in the kitchen. "Oh, Molly, what a silly kid's drawing," she said, her voice strained. She reached for it, pulling it gently from Molly's grasp. "Dave, don't read too much into it. Kids draw all sorts of things." She quickly folded the paper, her movements precise, and tucked it into her purse. "It's just a phase," she added, not looking at him. "Nothing to worry about." Later that night, long after Susan and Molly were asleep, Dave found himself in Susan's study. He retrieved the folded drawing from her purse. The crayon figure stared up at him from the page, simple and stark. He smoothed it out, then walked to his own office, sliding the drawing into a manila folder marked Utilities. A quiet, deep unease settling in his bones, cold and heavy. Dave found himself watching Susan more closely, a habit he hadn't realized he'd developed. He noticed the subtle shifts, the new blouse in a brighter color, a different brand of lipstick, an extra layer of perfume in the mornings that lingered in the hallway. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a slow, almost imperceptible tilt, like a picture frame nudged slightly off-center. He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was stress from her job, he thought. Or maybe it was his own lighter workload at the architecture firm with the Peterson renovation project wrapping up that left him too much time to overthink. But the persistent feeling, a dull throb behind his ribs, wouldn't go away. He started tracking the odometer on Susan's car. Each morning after she pulled out of the driveway, he'd jot down the numbers, a small, furtive act that felt both shameful and necessary. When she returned, he'd check again. The mileage often seemed to exceed the distance to the school and back, even with a short errand. A 12-mile round trip would sometimes register 15 or even 17. He knew the back roads, the shortcuts. There were places she could have gone, places she hadn't mentioned. One Tuesday evening, the silence in the house felt particularly heavy. Susan had called, saying she was held up at school, a late meeting with the principal. Dave put Molly to bed, then, on a sudden impulse, drove out. The school parking lot was almost empty, a sprawling expanse of asphalt beneath the sodium glow of the streetlights. Only one car remained, tucked away near the far end, Susan's sedan, unmistakable. He circled the block twice, the engine idling softly. No one emerged. The school building was dark, save for a single light on in what looked like the administrative wing. The stark sight of her car, lone in the empty lot, long after everyone else had left, solidified a cold lump in his gut. Her phone had become an extension of her hand. It went everywhere. To the kitchen while she cooked, into the living room while she watched TV, and even, he noticed, to the bathroom. No longer face down, it was often clutched in her palm, her thumb hovering, ready to dismiss or respond. The constant presence of M. Anderson on the screen felt like a third person in the house, an unspoken, intrusive presence. "Maybe we should go out," Dave said one evening, trying to sound casual as he wiped down the counter. "Just the two of us, like we used to. Get dinner, maybe a movie." He looked at her, hoping for a spark of their old connection. Susan was looking at her phone, her brow furrowed. "Oh, sure, Dave. Yeah, that sounds nice," she replied, her voice distant, her eyes still on the screen. She didn't look up, her agreement half-hearted, already forgotten. The next day, Molly, ever observant, shared another small detail that pricked at the wound. "Mommy and Mr. Anderson had lunch outside the school today," she announced, coloring at the kitchen table. "They ate sandwiches at the park." Dave felt a tightening in his jaw. Susan had said she was eating in the staff lounge, catching up on grading during her break. Another discrepancy, another quiet omission. A few days later, while cleaning out Susan's console in the car, searching for a misplaced library book, Dave found a crumpled receipt. It was from a cafe called The Daily Grind, a trendy spot about 20 minutes south of their town, nowhere near the school or her usual routes. Dated the previous Tuesday, a day Susan had marked down as a full day of staff meetings, the receipt clearly listed 2 expensive coffees and 2 artisanal pastries. The paper felt heavy in his hand. His internal struggle intensified. He wanted to trust her, to believe the woman he married, the mother of his child, but the mounting evidence felt like stones in his pocket, weighing him down, pulling him under. He'd replay conversations, analyze glances, dissect every small interaction. Was he imagining things? Was he being paranoid? The questions circled endlessly in his mind. Dave started waking in the dead of night, the house silent and dark around him. He'd lie there staring at the ceiling, his mind a relentless projector, replaying every suspicious interaction. The late calls, the guarded phone, Molly's innocent revelations, the receipt. Each memory, sharp and vivid, picked at the edges of his sleep, leaving him hollow and tired by morning. He thought about confronting Mr. Anderson directly. Imagined walking into the school, finding him in the hallway, perhaps in front of other teachers. But the thought dissolved into a cold fear. What would that do to Susan's reputation? To Molly, who might innocently witness the fallout? He couldn't risk it, not yet. The potential consequences felt too destructive, too public. Susan, for her part, sometimes seemed to carry a quiet burden. She'd occasionally express guilt over small, trivial things, forgetting to pick up a dry cleaning order, missing a minor school event for Molly. Dave now interpreted these as veiled signs of a deeper, unspoken secret, a larger guilt she couldn't articulate. Her apologies felt heavy, weighted with something more than just a forgotten chore. A growing distance spread between them, a wall slowly building brick by quiet brick. Their conversations became shallower, their silences longer. It was as if they were moving through separate rooms, occupying the same space but never quite connecting. One afternoon, he met his old college friend Pete for a beer. "Things are a little strained at home," Dave admitted, swirling the foam in his glass. He kept his words vague, speaking of general marital stress, the pressures of daily life. He couldn't bring himself to say more, to voice the specific fears that gnawed at him. But Pete, who had known Dave for 20 years, just nodded slowly, his eyes meeting Dave's with a look of quiet understanding, sensing a deeper anguish than Dave was letting on. Dave felt more isolated than ever, trapped in his own suspicions, the perfect life he envisioned in daily, slowly unraveling around him. The evening started like any other. Molly was asleep, the house settling into its quiet nighttime rhythm. Susan went to take a shower, leaving her phone on the nightstand, a rare lapse in her otherwise unwavering vigilance. Dave sat on the edge of the bed, ostensibly reading a magazine, but his eyes kept drifting to the black rectangle. His heart began to pound, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. He felt a sickening pull, a magnetic force. Just check it, he told himself. Just confirm. He justified it as needing to see if there was a message from his office, a late email perhaps, but his intention was clear, ugly, and undeniable. He picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly. The screen lit up instantly, displaying a flurry of messages, not from his office, not from a friend. They were from a contact saved simply as A. He didn't need to scroll far. "Miss you, counting down until we can be alone," read one message, followed by a small, red heart emoji. The words hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. His vision blurred for a second, then sharpened with a terrible clarity. He scrolled a little further, his thumb moving with a life of its own. "Can't stop thinking about our last moment," another text read. "You make work bearable, S." The S for Susan, the A for Anderson. His world, the carefully constructed world he believed in, shattered into a million sharp pieces. The text confirmed his darkest fears, laying them bare in the stark glow of the phone screen. There was no room for doubt, no space for rationalization. He kept scrolling, a morbid compulsion taking hold. His thumb brushed against a folder he hadn't known existed. Recently deleted. He clicked it open. There in the digital ether were photos, not just of Susan and Mr. Anderson, but of them together, laughing, their faces close, arms around each other. Some of the poses were intimate, a hand resting on a thigh, a head on a shoulder, images that spoke of a closeness that went beyond collegial. They were smiling, a carefree joy in Susan's face that he hadn't seen in months, maybe years. He navigated to the calendar app. An entry marked off-site conference for a weekend 2 months ago. That was the weekend Susan had claimed to spend with her Aunt Carol in Wisconsin, attending a family reunion. He remembered her packing a small bag, making sure Molly was settled with him for the weekend. The dates on the calendar entry matched perfectly. His stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. The betrayal was deeper, more calculated than he had ever imagined. Susan's footsteps approached the bedroom, a soft padding as she walked from the bathroom. Dave's movements became mechanical, devoid of thought. He carefully placed the phone back on the nightstand, exactly where it had been. He wiped his fingerprints from the screen and the smooth case, as if erasing his presence, erasing the moment he had stumbled upon a truth he could never unsee. His mind reeled, a chaotic storm of images and words, but his hands moved with an almost surgical precision. The air in their home, once a comfort, suddenly felt thick, tainted by the secret he now carried. It pressed down on him, suffocating him. He could hear the shower running again, the water drumming against the tiles, the sound echoing hollowly in his ears. He couldn't stay in the bedroom. Couldn't face her. Not now. Dave retreated to his office, the door clicking softly behind him. He didn't turn on the light. In the faint glow from the streetlights outside, he walked to the filing cabinet, his fingers finding the manila folder. He pulled out Molly's drawing. The crayon stick figures of Mommy hugging Mr. Anderson stared back at him, childishly rendered, yet more chilling than any photograph. The heart drawn around them felt like a cruel mockery. He spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling, the familiar patterns of the stucco, now distorted by the weight of his discovery. The images of Susan and Anderson, laughing, touching, the words of their texts, "Miss you," counting down, our last moment, burned into his memory, playing on a relentless loop. Each detail felt like a shard of glass, embedding itself deeper with every replay. The silence of the house felt deafening, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. The quiet ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs seemed to mock him, marking the passage of time, each second a slow, deliberate confirmation of his pain. He had built his life on trust, on the foundation of their shared future. Now he realized the trust was irrevocably broken. Their perfect life, the solid structure he had envisioned, was nothing more than a facade, skillfully built by Susan, brick by quiet brick, on a foundation of lies. The next morning, the breakfast table felt colder than usual, the air thick with the unspoken. Molly was absorbed in her cereal, oblivious. Dave waited until she had left for school, waving goodbye from the porch, her small backpack bouncing. Then he turned to Susan, who was clearing the table, her back to him. He held Molly's drawing, the crumpled piece of construction paper, a stark accusation in his trembling hand. His voice, when it came, was low, a strained whisper, but it trembled with a rage he hadn't known he possessed. "What is this, Susan?" he demanded, unfolding the drawing. "What is secret grown-up stuff?" Susan froze, her hand still on a coffee cup. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, a flicker of panic crossed her face. "Dave, what are you talking about?" she tried, her voice unnaturally light. "It's just a silly drawing. You're being paranoid." She moved to take the paper from him, but he held it away. "Don't try that," he said, his voice gaining strength, though it still felt foreign to him. "Don't you dare try to lie." He recited the text, word for damning word. "Miss you, counting down until we can be alone. Can't stop thinking about our last moment. You make work bearable, S." Does that sound like paranoia to you, Susan? He then detailed the calendar entry about the off-site conference that perfectly matched her fake trip to Aunt Carol's. He spoke of the deleted photos, the intimate poses, the casual comfort in their stolen moments. He left nothing out. As he spoke, Susan's face drained of color, going from a faint flush to a sickly white. Her eyes darted around the kitchen, avoiding his gaze. She stammered, a choked sound escaping her throat. Then her knees seemed to give out. She collapsed onto a kitchen chair, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Dave," she choked out, her voice muffled. I'm so sorry. It's true. It's Mr. Anderson." She started pleading, a torrent of words tumbling out. She blamed loneliness, a feeling that she was misunderstood, Dave's increasing preoccupation with his work, his late nights at the office, the growing distance between them. Her excuses felt hollow, thin, like cheap cloth. He felt a hollow ache deep in his chest, her words like salt in a gaping wound. "How long, Susan?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been living this other life?" Their argument escalated, the quiet kitchen suddenly filled with their rising voices. The words became sharp, bitter, each one a weapon. Dave could hear the echo of his own anger, the pain in Susan's desperate pleas. He worried about Molly, about her being woken by the sound. The thought of her hearing this, hearing their family shatter, made him clench his fists, a desperate attempt to control the chaos. "I can't look at you," he said, his voice trembling again, but this time with disgust more than rage. "I can't look at our life the same way ever again. You broke us, Susan. You broke our family." He emphasized the last words, letting them hang in the air, heavy with accusation. Susan lifted her head, her face tear-streaked, her eyes red. "Please, Dave, for Molly's sake, please don't tell anyone. Think about her. Think about my job, my career." She was begging now, her voice raw, desperate. The request, focused on her reputation, her career, felt like another betrayal, another sign of her self-preservation above all else. Dave, numb with shock and anger, didn't answer. He simply turned, his movements stiff and mechanical, and walked out of the kitchen. He retrieved his overnight bag from the back of his closet, stuffing a few shirts and a pair of jeans into it. He went to the spare bedroom, the door closing softly but decisively behind him. The chasm between them, once a subtle crack, was now an immense, gaping canyon. Later that afternoon, when Molly returned from school, she sensed the tension instantly. The house was too quiet, the air too still. She found Dave in the living room, staring out the window. "Is Mommy sad, Daddy?" she asked, her small voice cutting through the heavy silence. Dave's heart clenched, a sharp physical pain. He forced a smile, a brittle facade he hoped would fool her. "No, sweetie," he lied, his voice sounding hollow even to his own ears. "Mommy's just a little tired." The immediate aftermath was a suffocating silence. A heavy cloud seemed to hang over their once vibrant home, smothering all warmth and light. Dave ate dinner mechanically, pushing food around his plate. Susan sat across from him, her eyes downcast, picking at her meal. The unspoken words filled the space between them, a poisonous gas. He considered contacting Mr. Anderson, the impulse for revenge warring with the desire for a quiet, contained resolution. What would he say? What good would it do? The thought of a public spectacle, of dragging Molly through more pain, held him back. The first full day after the revelation passed in a haze of unspoken words, forced smiles for Molly, and searing pain for Dave. He went through the motions, a ghost in his own house, his life irrevocably altered. The perfect picture, smashed beyond repair. In the quiet of his spare bedroom, the third night after the confrontation, Dave finally called Pete. The phone felt heavy in his hand. "It's worse than I let on," he started, his voice a low, raw rasp. He unloaded the entire story, the texts, the photos, the off-site conference that wasn't. He spoke for a long time, the words spilling out, bitter and scalding. Pete listened, a steady, patient presence on the other end of the line. When Dave finally fell silent, the only sound was his own ragged breathing. "Dave," Pete said, his voice calm, pragmatic. "I'm sorry, man. That's a hell of a thing to go through. You need to do two things. Document everything, every text, every date, every detail. And you need to talk to a lawyer. Find out where you stand." The next few days were a blur of cold calculation. Late into the night, after Susan and Molly were asleep, Dave sat at his office desk. He researched divorce attorneys online, the keywords infidelity, custody, and marital assets stark against the glowing screen. Each click felt like another nail in the coffin of his marriage. He started his covert gathering of evidence. He used his own phone to take careful, precise screenshots of any lingering messages or call logs he could access on Susan's phone during her brief lapses in vigilance, sending them to his own encrypted email. He meticulously went through their shared online banking statements, credit card bills, looking for unusual charges, any expenditures that didn't align with their family routine. The receipt from the daily grind was tucked into his growing file. He was building a case, brick by painstaking brick, the architect in him taking over. Susan, meanwhile, made desperate attempts to reconcile. She left him small, handwritten notes on his pillow, apologies etched in shaky cursive. She cooked his favorite meals, the scent of pot roast or apple pie filling the kitchen. A desperate plea for normalcy. But Dave's trust was shattered, ground to dust beneath the weight of her deception. He ate her cooking, read her notes, but his heart remained closed. A cold, hard knot. One afternoon, Dave made a call to the school principal's office. He chose an hour when he knew the principal would likely be alone. He kept his voice low, his tone measured, carefully anonymous. He hinted at a staff conduct issue, a potential breach of professional ethics involving Mr. Anderson and a married colleague. Just something to look into, he said before hanging up. He knew the seeds of suspicion would be planted. Later that week after school hours, Dave found himself in the deserted parking lot. He waited. Mr. Anderson's car was still there. As the man emerged from the building, keys jingling, Dave stepped out from the shadows. "Mr. Anderson," Dave said, his voice steady, flat, but with an unmistakable edge of menace. Mr. Anderson stopped, startled, his face blanching slightly as he recognized Dave. "Dave," he stammered, his eyes darting. "What a surprise. Is Susan all right?" He tried to sound casual, but his voice was thin. "Cut the act," Dave said. He pulled out his phone, displaying one of the screenshots, a particularly intimate text message from Anderson to Susan. "This surprise is about this, and your staff meetings at the daily grind." Mr. Anderson's face drained of all color. He stammered, initially trying to deny, then showing a flicker of fear. "Look, Dave, I'm sorry. She came on to me. It just happened." He offered a weak, half-hearted apology, already trying to shift the blame, to paint Susan as the instigator. Dave's anger, cold and simmering, flared. "Don't you dare blame her," he said, his voice tight, barely above a whisper. "You knew what you were doing. You're a grown man. You chose this. Both of you did." He leaned in closer. "I know everything, every message, every time, every lie. And if I choose to, Mr. Anderson, I can ensure everyone else knows too. Not just the principal, your family, the school board, everything." The threat hung in the air, potent and undeniable. Mr. Anderson swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on Dave's unwavering eyes. Back home, Susan sensed Dave's hardened resolve. The conversation he'd had, the look in his eyes, it solidified for her the full scope of potential consequences. She broke down again, not in desperate pleas for forgiveness, but in quiet, shuddering sobs that spoke of a dawning, terrible realization. Dave struggled with the morality of his actions. He knew that exposing them fully would cause a ripple effect, hurting Molly, perhaps irrevocably. But the urge for justice, for a reckoning, was powerful, a relentless current pulling him forward. Despite still living under the same roof, sharing meals for Molly's sake, Dave felt a profound sense of loneliness. He was alone with his knowledge, alone with his pain. The weight of his choices, both hers and his, settled heavy in the air. He knew that life's costly choices, once made, demanded their full price. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The idea of rebuilding their marriage now felt utterly impossible. The foundation, once so solid, had crumbled into dust. Word of teacher misconduct started as a faint whisper, a barely audible rustle in the quiet corridors of Molly's school. It circulated vaguely at first, fueled by anonymous tips and the inherent human tendency to speculate. Dave heard bits and pieces from other parents at pickup, hushed tones, quick glances. He knew his anonymous call to the principal had found its mark. The principal, a stern woman named Mrs. Davies, initiated an internal investigation. Susan and Mr. Anderson were interviewed separately behind closed doors. Susan, cornered by the undeniable evidence Dave had provided indirectly, was eventually forced to admit to an inappropriate relationship with Mr. Anderson. She downplayed its severity, framing it as a brief, regrettable lapse in judgment, a moment of weakness under stress. But the admission, however minimized, was now part of her official record. When Dave dropped Molly off at school, he noticed the increased scrutiny. Other parents, once friendly and open, now exchanged knowing glances, their smiles tight, their conversations abruptly ceasing as he approached. The small community, once a source of comfort and familiarity, now felt like a watchful, judgmental eye, its collective gaze heavy on him, and by extension, on Susan. Shortly after the investigation began, Mr. Anderson was quietly placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. This caused a definite stir among the staff. Teachers huddled in small groups, their voices low, their expressions serious. The lack of specifics only fueled the rumors, painting Mr. Anderson's absence with a darker, more serious tint. Molly, observant as always, noticed. "Why isn't Mr. Anderson at school anymore, Daddy?" she asked one evening, her brow furrowed with concern. "And why does Mommy seem sad all the time?" Dave's heart clenched. He gave her a vague answer, something about Mr. Anderson needing to work at a different school, trying to construct a narrative that wouldn't shatter her innocent world. Susan sat silently, picking at her food, unable to meet his gaze. One afternoon at Molly's weekly playdate, Mi's mother, Brenda, cornered Dave by the swings. Her voice was cautious, almost apologetic. "Dave," she began, glancing around to ensure no one was within earshot. "I don't mean to pry, but is everything okay with Susan and the school? We've heard things." Dave felt a flush of heat rise to his face. He offered a non-committal response, a vague assurance that Susan was fine, but the damage was done. The whispers had grown into questions, now delivered directly to him. That evening, after much deliberation, Dave made another significant step. He filed for legal separation. It was a cold, clinical act, one that officially marked the beginning of the end. He signed the papers, his hand steady, feeling a hollow void open inside him. The first official step toward dismantling their shared life was complete. A few days later, a formal letter arrived for Susan from the school board. It was thick, official, its contents detailing the findings of the internal investigation and outlining potential disciplinary actions, up to and including termination. The consequences, once just a distant threat, were now staring her in the face. The stress took a visible toll on Susan. She became increasingly withdrawn, her usual bright energy replaced by a quiet, haunted look. She started losing weight, her clothes hanging a little looser on her frame. Her once radiant warmth, a quality Dave had cherished, seemed to diminish, replaced by a constant, palpable anxiety. Dave grappled with a complex mix of emotions. There was a grim satisfaction in seeing justice served, in witnessing the consequences of her choices unfold, but it was intertwined with a profound sadness. He knew his acts of retribution were not only dismantling her life, but also irrevocably dismantling his own family, piece by painful piece. He tried in his own mom to shield Molly from the brewing storm. He maintained her routines, read her bedtime stories, took her to the park. He wanted to preserve a sense of normalcy, a stable world for her amidst the chaos. But even Molly, with her innocent eyes, could sense the heavy atmosphere, the silence that now often fell between her parents. Financial strain began to make itself apparent. The legal fees were piling up, small expenses adding up to a significant drain on their joint savings. Dave found himself reconsidering personal projects, pushing back plans for his own architectural firm, the future suddenly uncertain. A few weeks later, Dave heard through the grapevine that Mr. Anderson had been quietly reassigned to a different district, a small town 2 hours west. His reputation in their community was damaged beyond repair. He was gone, effectively exiled. Dave had achieved a measure of his revenge. Yet the news brought him no real solace, just a quiet, aching emptiness. The legal separation proceedings began, marked by a sterile, almost dehumanizing efficiency. Dave and Susan sat across from each other in a lawyer's office, their own attorneys flanking them like silent, expensive sentinels. The process was cold, transactional, each clause and condition a further dissection of their shared life. Their marriage, once a tapestry woven with love and plans, was now reduced to a list of assets, debts, and custody schedules. Soon after, Molly's teacher, Mrs. Jenkins, called Dave. Her voice was gentle, but her concern was clear. "Molly's been very quiet in class, Dave," she said. "She's usually so bright, so engaged. Lately, she seems withdrawn, and there have been a few outbursts, which is very unlike her." The news hit Dave hard. He saw the direct ripple effect of their fractured home on their daughter. That evening, Dave and Susan sat Molly down. They tried to explain, using carefully chosen words, softened phrases, about mommy and daddy needing some time apart. They spoke of love, of it not being Molly's fault. But the hurt in their voices, the palpable tension in the air, spoke volumes beyond their careful explanations. Molly's bright eyes, usually full of curiosity, clouded with confusion and sadness. "Is it my fault?" she asked, her small voice barely a whisper. "Is it because I made you mad?" The question, so innocent, so profound, stabbed at Dave's heart. The formal repercussions for Susan arrived swiftly. She received her official reprimand from the school board, a 3-month suspension without pay, followed by a permanent demotion to a non-teaching administrative role. Her once stellar teaching career, a source of pride and purpose for her, was irrevocably stained. Future prospects in education, in their small, interconnected community, were now dim, perhaps extinguished entirely. Dave realized the true cost of the affair extended far beyond their marriage. It was a poison that seeped into every aspect of their lives. Friends, once shared, now chose sides, often subtly. Some distanced themselves entirely, finding the awkwardness too much to bear. Both Dave and Susan found themselves increasingly isolated, adrift in their own separate spheres of pain and judgment. Their once picturesque home, filled with laughter and the comfortable hum of family life, now felt like a battleground. It was silent most evenings, but the echoes of arguments, the weight of silent resentment, hung heavy in every room. Dave made a conscious effort to connect with Molly. He spent extra time with her, reading more stories, taking her to her favorite park. He tried to rebuild her sense of security, to create a safe haven for her amidst the wreckage of their family. He watched her play, her small figure a poignant reminder of all they were losing. Susan, for her part, expressed deep regret. "I'm so sorry, Dave," she said one night, her voice raw. "Not just for everything, but for Molly, for what this is doing to her, to us." Dave saw her pain, saw the genuine remorse etched on her face. But his own wound was too fresh, too deep. The betrayal still festered, making any immediate comfort or forgiveness impossible. He simply nodded, unable to offer the words she sought. The financial burden of 2 separate households quickly became clear. Susan's demotion meant a significant cut in her income. Dave's legal fees, combined with the new expenses, strained his architect firm. He had to put off hiring new staff, take on less ambitious projects, the financial stability they had built together slowly eroding. Molly's drawings, once full of vibrant rainbows and unicorns, began to shift. Sometimes Dave would find pictures featuring broken lines or solitary figures standing alone beneath a gray sky. They were small, subtle details, but they spoke volumes about her internal world, mirroring the fractured reality she now inhabited. The concept of home as they knew it ceased to exist. Their house, once the heart of their family, was now just a dwelling, a place where 2 parents and a child existed, but not truly lived together. It was replaced by 2 separate, smaller worlds: Dave's world in the spare bedroom, Susan's in the master, and Molly's, a fragile space between them, struggling to hold on to what was left. Susan eventually moved out of their marital home. She found a small, nondescript apartment on the other side of town, away from the familiar streets and the watchful eyes of their former neighbors. The house felt emptier, yet somehow heavier, without her presence. Dave stepped fully into the role of primary caregiver for Molly. The rhythm of his days shifted dramatically. School pickups and drop-offs, supervising homework, cooking dinner, bedtime stories, all fell to him. He navigated these new responsibilities alone, the weight of them settling on his shoulders. He missed the quiet evenings in his office, the unstructured time he used to have for himself. Susan, meanwhile, struggled. Her demotion had shattered her confidence, and her reputation, now thoroughly tarnished in their small community, preceded her. She applied for other teaching positions, but the responses were few and far between, often polite rejections that hinted at her past. She started talking about career changes, about going back to school for something entirely different. Her future uncertain, diminished. Mr. Anderson's situation proved to be even worse. Word filtered back to Dave through Pete, who had heard from a mutual acquaintance. Anderson had lost his job entirely, his professional life and education effectively over. His marriage had also collapsed under the weight of his affair, and he had packed up and moved out of state, seeking a fresh start in another corner of the country. Dave had wanted retribution, but the scale of Anderson's ruin felt disquieting. In moments of quiet reflection, often late at night when the house was silent, Dave experienced profound regret. He questioned if the exposure, the relentless pursuit of retribution, had been worth the emotional devastation it wrought. He had broken the silence, pulled back the curtain, but the cost was staggering. He saw Susan during the handoffs for Molly, usually at the neutral ground of the park or school. She looked haggard, aged beyond her years, the once radiant warmth in her eyes replaced by a tired, hollow gaze. He felt a pang of pity, a fleeting moment of empathy, but it was quickly stifled by the lingering anger, the memory of her betrayal still fresh and sharp. Molly, innocent victim in this marital war, showed increasing signs of anxiety. Sometimes she would cling to Dave, burying her face in his leg at drop-offs. Other times, she would ask poignant questions during bedtime stories. "Daddy, why do families break?" she'd whisper, her voice small, fragile. Dave would pull her closer, offering what comfort he could, but the answers felt inadequate, insufficient for the complex hurt in her young heart. To cope with the betrayal, the crushing weight of responsibility, and the messy process of co-parenting through a divorce, Dave started therapy. He sat in a comfortable chair, talking to a stranger, unraveling the knots of anger, grief, and confusion that had become his constant companions. It was a slow, arduous process, but he knew he needed to be whole for Molly. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Susan. It wasn't a legal document, nor another plea for reconciliation. It was a heartfelt, handwritten letter. She didn't ask for forgiveness, knowing she hadn't earned it. Instead, she expressed deep sorrow for the pain she had caused, especially to Molly. She wrote about her own regrets, her own brokenness. Dave read it, felt a flicker of something, a momentary softening in his hardened heart. But the wounds were still too raw, too deep for any real sense of reconciliation to take root. He folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. The sense of victory he had once sought felt hollow, empty. He had gained his justice, yes, but he had lost his family in the process. The trade-off felt unbearable. He realized with a chilling clarity that the price for infidelity wasn't just paid by the unfaithful, but by everyone connected, an endless chain reaction of pain. The divorce was finalized on a cold Tuesday afternoon. It was a quiet, somber affair, little more than a formality now. The judge's gavel struck, marking the official, legal end of their marriage. That night, Dave looked at his left hand. The wedding ring, once a constant presence, was now gone from his finger, leaving a pale indentation on his skin. He felt the weight of a past he couldn't reclaim, a future that looked starkly different from the one he had envisioned. The Midwestern landscape, with its vast open skies and endless fields, once a backdrop for their dreams, now seemed to mirror the quiet, lingering sadness that had settled deep in his life. Years passed, stretching into a new decade. Molly was no longer the little girl asking why families break. She was a quiet, thoughtful young woman, heading off to college soon. The faint scar from her parents' split remained, subtly influencing her outlook, her cautious demeanor in matters of the heart. It wasn't a wound that bled openly anymore, but a deep, ingrained memory that shaped her. Dave had, in his own methodical way, rebuilt his life. His architecture firm thrived, taking on more ambitious projects in the burgeoning small towns surrounding their suburb. He was a devoted father, his world centered firmly around Molly, her education, her interests, her well-being. He found a quiet satisfaction in the steady rhythm of their lives, a rhythm he had meticulously constructed from the wreckage. He occasionally saw Susan at school events, Molly's graduation, or parent-teacher conferences. Their interactions were always polite, brief, and distant. They exchanged pleasantries about Molly, discussed logistics, but the warmth that once existed between them was gone, replaced by a cool, respectful civility. It was a truce, not a reconciliation. Susan now worked at a community center across town, using her teaching skills to run adult literacy programs and after-school tutoring. She was a shadow of her former self. The vibrant energy that defined her diminished by time and consequence. She seemed content, in a quiet, subdued way, but the spark of her earlier ambition had visibly faded. Her demotion had closed too many doors. Dave often reflected on the betrayal on the long, winding road that followed. He understood now that while time could heal the raw edges of a wound, some scars were permanent, etched deep into the fabric of a person's life. They were reminders of battles fought, of lessons learned, often at immense cost. So he observed Molly's cautious approach to relationships, her reluctance to fully commit, her tendency to hold a part of herself back. It was a direct consequence, he knew, of her early experience with family brokenness, a silent lesson learned from their fractured home. He hoped for her sake that she would eventually find the courage to trust, to love fully, despite the example set before her. Mr. Anderson had long since faded into a distant memory, his name occasionally whispered in local circles as a cautionary tale. His life had been entirely uprooted, his career destroyed, his marriage dissolved. Dave often wondered where he had gone, what new life he had built, but the curiosity was detached, devoid of animosity. The retribution, once so vital, now felt like a chapter closed, a ledger balanced, albeit with a heavy hand. Dave had learned to navigate his new reality, finding solace in the small-town routines, the predictable ebb and flow of Midwestern life. He found comfort in the solidity of his work, the familiar faces at the coffee shop, and most profoundly, in Molly's unwavering presence. She was his anchor, the constant around which his reconfigured world revolved. He realized the morality of the situation wasn't as black and white as revenge had once made it seem. Everyone had suffered consequences, each in their own way. There were no true victors, only survivors. The neat lines of right and wrong blurred into shades of gray, leaving a complex tapestry of human error and pain. The picturesque home, now solely Dave's, no longer felt perfect, no longer the idyllic setting for a dream that had shattered. But it felt like a place of quiet strength, of resilience. It was a home built anew, not on the fragile foundation of a perfect illusion, but on the enduring strength of a single father's love and his daughter's quiet growth. One evening, as they were packing up Molly's room for college, Molly found an old box of her childhood drawings. She held up a crumpled piece of construction paper. It was Molly's depiction of Mommy hugging Mr. Anderson, the disproportionately large heart still crayon bright around the stick figures. "Do you ever think about what if, Daddy?" she asked, her voice soft. Dave looked at the drawing, and a wave of melancholy washed over him, swift and profound. He paused, then wrapped an arm around her. "We learn from our past, honey," he said, his voice gentle. "We build new futures." Sometimes Dave would walk through the old park where he had first met Susan, where they had laughed and made plans for a life together. He remembered a different woman then, a different dream, innocent and full of promise. Those memories, too, were part of him now, not to be erased, but absorbed into the larger narrative of his life. He knew his story wouldn't end with a grand resolution, no sweeping cinematic triumph. Instead, it would be a quiet acceptance of life's complexities, its enduring sorrows, and the slow, steady, often painful process of moving forward. He stood by his living room window, looking out at the familiar Midwestern landscape, its vastness mirroring the changes within him. He was a man forever changed, carrying the weight and the quiet wisdom of his past.